Ch.61. Lost red pearl. Inadvertent eyes red with desire too.
Si Lian pulled at his earlobes.
One of the earrings is gone.
The people of Xianlei believed that the pinnacle of cultivation was the harmony of yin and yang, the unity of male and female.
The form of the gods was inexhaustibly ever-changing, and naturally unbound by
gender restrictions, shifting to men or women as they willed. Thus, this belief was woven into the design of the god-pleasing costume. Throughout history, every god-pleasing martial warrior had donned adornments and accessories that possessed the form and details of both sexes, such as earrings, bracelets, and so on.
When Si Lian was preparing for the role, he pierced his ears and put on a pair of
earrings. It was a pair of brilliantly deep red coral pearls, lustrous and smooth, radiant and opulent, rare and sublime. However, when Si Lian was combing his hair just then, only one of the pair of red coral pearls was left. The moment he said it was lost, Mu Qing's relaxed expression froze again, but the other two did not notice at all. Feng Xin looked all over the chamber first, inside and out, but returned empty-handed. You're so scatterbrained, even something worn on your ears can be lost. I didn't find it in the pavilion of Xianlei. Cyril, go out and look on the roads.
Pray to the heavens you didn't lose it during the parade. Si Lian was puzzled too, but didn't care for it much.
Maybe. If that's the case, then there'd be no way you'd find it. If it's lost, it's lost. Mu Qing, on the other hand, brought out the broom he usually used to sweep. He said quietly, that pearl is too precious, we should at least try and look. Maybe it rolled under the bed or a shelf. He then started sweeping, and Si Lian responded, then, why don't we call for a few more hands to
help?
Crowds get handsy. We don't want people sneaking it in their pockets before we find anything, Feng Xin said offhandedly. Mu Qing was quietly checking under the bed, but when he heard Feng Xin's words, his face momentarily
turned a shade of deathly white. He rose to his feet in a fit, and crack, the broom in his hands broke into two. Si Lian was startled. Ever since they left the great martial hall, Feng Xin was filled with complaints about Mu Qing, but the words never left his lips. Now that he saw Mu Qing blew up first, he got angry too. What are you doing, breaking things so suddenly? Who pissed you off now? Mu Qing replied coldly, why don't you tell me straight what it is you want to say, instead of casting shadows where there are none? I have nothing to do with the lost pearl. Feng Xin had always been a straightforward individual, and this was the first time hearing someone accuse him of casting shadows where there are none, and puffed a laugh from anger. Why don't you tell that to yourself?
Exclamation mark. What did I say? I didn't say you stole it, but you got all flustered. What feeling? Guilty. Si Lian broke out of his shock and sat up on the bed, feeling dread. Feng Xin, that's enough. A few veins popped instantly on Mu Qing's forehead.
Feng Xin really didn't think much of it, and asked in
confusion, what?
It really wasn't the right time for Si Lian to explain, so he could only try and pacify Mu Qing.
Don't misunderstand, Feng Xin's comments were off-handed, he wasn't directing them at you. Mu Qing clenched his fists tight, then loosened them, but at last did not continue to blow up.
However, his
Eyes were growing red, and he turned to see Lian, enunciating each word as he stared at him. You don't keep your promises. No. You're wrong. Si Lian cried. Liu King closed his mouth and inhaled a few times, threw a furious stink eye at Feng Xin, then without another word, ran out the door.
Si Lian jumped off the bed and was about to give chase, but was stopped
in mid-step. Your Highness, you haven't even put on shoes.
It'd be a disgrace going out with your hair down and in
such a mess. Help me stop him. Si Lian ordered. At least put on your shoes first and tie up your hair, Feng Xin said. And leave him be. He's always weird. Like this, who knows what nerve we touched now, going mental out of the blue.
Liu King was long gone by then, and Si Lian saw he wouldn't be able to catch up, so instead he grabbed
for a hair tie to fasten his hair in a rush. As he did so, he sighed and said, he wasn't going mental, you just accidentally said the wrong thing. Feng Xin brought out Si Lian's usual white training garb from the closet and threw it at him. What did I say wrong? Si Lian replied as he slipped on his boots.
I can't tell you.
Anyway, come with me to go find him, and tell him it was all a misunderstanding, and that you weren't accusing him of anything. Feng Xin frowned. What is it that you can't tell me? Si Lian's lips were sealed tight.
Feng Xin was becoming more suspicious, and fought back on Liu King's
furious expression. He spoke up suddenly. He didn't actually steal from you before, did he? Si Lian immediately waved vigorously. No. No. Seeing him like this, Feng Xin was even more sure. So that's it. No wonder his temper flared, it's because he was guilty. So when did he steal? Not so loud. Si Lian hushed anxiously. Feng Xin lowered his voice, something like this happened and you didn't tell me. Exclamation mark. Tell me now. Si Lian saw that Feng Xin was already suspicious. If he continued to lie, then it'd be found out either way.
So woefully, he had to relent.
It doesn't really count as stealing, but, sigh, I'll start from the beginning. You remember, right? 2 years ago when I first entered the Royal Holy Pavilion, there was once I lost a leaf of gold foil. Hearing this, Feng Xin's eyes widened and he slapped his thigh. That time! Exclamation mark. 3 years ago, Si Lian begged and pleaded in all manner of ways until finally his parents relented and permitted him to enter the Royal Holy Pavilion for training before the age of 20. A year later, the Pavilion of Xianlei completed construction. Si Lian could at last move in, and he did so with great excitement. When Si Lian first moved in, he really didn't bring a lot with him. Only 2 carriages full of books, and 200 treasured swords. But the queen loved her son dearly, and was afraid the training life would be too quiet and boring, so later she ordered for 20 servants and 4 large carriages full of trinkets.
That the crown prince loved to be sent to Mount Taikang, the mounting caravans impressive and
dramatic. Included in this was a set of the 108 leaves that make up the golden foil palace. Building a palace out of golden foils was a popular game enjoyed by the Xianlei nobility. At the time, to have so much luxury enter the mountain caused a small wave of complaints. The Royal Holy Pavilion consisted of serious cultivators who weren't quite familiar with the prince's character just yet, and Although they couldn't say much publicly, behind his back there was much chatter. Did His Highness the Crown Prince come to train, or did he come to play? What could this son of the royal family cultivate if he
only came for fun?
When Feng Xin heard those grievances, he had the mind to dispute them, but Si Lian told him not to worry about it, and smiled. It's only natural they should think that way. They'll know after a while that I'm not here to play games. And also, who the number one in this generation of trainees is. However, not long after, something happened.
Si Lian was trying to send away as many of the 4 large carriages and servants the queen gifted him as possible, but when he counted inventory, he found that in the 108 leaves of gold foils,
one was missing. That set of gold foils was packed in the carriages, and once at Mount Taikang, it had never left the pavilion of Xianlei. If it wasn't lost on the road, then it had been stolen. Nothing was found on the road, so Si Lian brought it up off-handedly to the Guoshi. However, when the Guoshi thought it might have been stolen, he became enraged at the idea that someone within the royal holy pavilion would commit this crime under the allure of golden foils, so he was determined to recover the golden leaf no matter what. If
it should be found on the person of anyone, the punishment would be severe to the utmost.
Thus, all 3,000 and more disciples of Mount Taikang had to stop what they were doing, and got dragged into forming teams to search room after room, chamber after chamber, of every single training hall. It was a huge fanfare, tiring out everyone, yet unexpectedly, halfway through the search, Si Lian suddenly corrected himself, apologized for causing everyone trouble, and said he suddenly remembered that he seemed to have already lost a leaf from that set of gold foils while he was still at the royal palace. Meaning, there should only be 107 leaves total after all. In order to investigate the whereabouts of the missing gold foil, that night at the Holy Royal Pavilion was complete chaos, utter pandemonium, and right when everyone was sweating with exhaustion, to have His Highness the Crown Prince suddenly make such an announcement to never mind after all, it was inevitable for many to feel aggrieved.
Thus, for the longest time there was a lot of noise behind his back.
Things like, well, he was the Crown Prince, so he got to call the shots, and hopefully next time his memory would be better, and remember the important things before calling for an investigation, and so on. Feng Xin was furious listening to it, but Si Lian still told him to let it go, and let time pass quietly. Sure enough, after that, Si Lian was indeed able to change things around completely, rising to unashamedly become the number 1 trainee of the Royal Holy Pavilion, over all 3,000 and some disciples. Because he was truly friendly and easygoing and not at all dependent on his background. Gradually his reputation improved amongst the others. Feng Xin wasn't one to remember the petty details, so he had forgotten this had happened. Now that it was brought up again, it dawned on him, and he was shocked and angry. It was Mu King Who walked away with that gold foil. Shush! Si Lian hushed him and looked around to make sure no one was around. That gold foil leaf fell out of the rattling carriage while coming up the mountain. Mu King was passing by while carrying water, and found it in the bushes. He kept it under his bed and hadn't figured out what to do with it, but that very night the Guoshi suddenly struck, ordering everyone to search rooms. I didn't know him at the time. and only saw an errand boy who looked distraught. Later, while I was sitting outside, he came up to serve me tea and admitted everything.
That's how I found out. Taking without telling is stealing.
Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. So you helped him bury this matter and told everyone that gold foil was lost in the royal palace. Whilst they were talking, Si Lian had finished dressing, and headed out the door. That's how it is. Feng Xin was going to die from rage.
He followed after Si Lian.
Your Highness, did you know that when
you first came to the Royal Holy Pavilion, just how many people talked shit about you?
Keep it down, Si Lian said.
He really did look quite distraught at the time. Pale as a ghost.
People here at the Royal Holy Pavilion already dislike him. If I had said anything, his life here would be over. Our
places in life are different, and we stand on different vantage points in this matter, so consequences can't be compared. Just then, a few young trainees approached him, and courteously bowed, their faces full of smiles, greeting them.
Your Highness. Si Lian smiled back, and the two parties brushed past each other. He said to Feng Xin, "See, I told you to. Give it time.
Now I get along with everyone who dare say anything bad about me." The two of them entered Mu King's bedchamber, but didn't see a soul, so they exited again to keep
searching. I already thought it strange at the time, since I'd never known you to have lost any leaves at the palace,
Feng Xin said. But I can't believe you didn't tell me about this for 2 years, and that you even told me
that you met him when he was sweeping.
Later, he asked me not to tell anyone, Si Lian said.
Since I agreed, of course I wouldn't tell, not even you. But now that you know, I'm the one who went back on my word. But you mustn't tell anyone else. How does that even count as going back on your word? Feng Xin said.
It's not like you told me
anything, it's his own guilty conscience making him freak out that gave him away.
No.
You promise me right now that this stops here. Otherwise I'll break up my relationship with you.
And you'll be cursed to never find a wife. Si Lian threatened.
Feng Xin PFFT ed.
You break up with me.
Exclamation mark. The day after our breakup, everyone in the kingdom of Xianlei will know one thing: His Highness the Crown Prince fainted from overly tight suspenders while dressing himself. Exclamation mark.
Fine.
I won't say a word. Who gives a shit about gossip anyway?
After a pause, he still decided to comment.
I bet he thinks I'm always picking on him because he thought I knew about the gold foil business, but really, I just don't like people like him.
A grown man thinking too
much about this and that. He must have suspected you told me a long time ago. Even concubines in a harem don't have thoughts and moods as twisted as his. So annoying. It's not as bad as you say, Si Lian said. The Royal Holy Pavilion had never lost anything before, meaning this was his first time, and at the end of the day it was for his mother. Anyway, he already assuredly promised that he would never do it again, so giving him another chance isn't wrong. And he kept his word. Besides, today when that little kid fell, if Mu King didn't cooperate with me, the parade wouldn't have ended so smoothly.
Feng Xin clicked his tongue. You're already going down in history for only 3 rounds around the capital. Of course he won't do anything else to you. Your Highness, I'm gonna say this right now. I don't believe a word of anything he said at the great martial hall.
Who here in the Royal Holy Pavilion doesn't know that when the Guoshi plays cards, he hears and sees no one?
He had to pick that time to pass on
the message, and stubbornly refused to clarify under whose orders he was sent, as if he was purposely trying to screw things up. Si Lian shook his head and said gravely, actually, in regard to this, I might have been indelicate too. I knew Mu King is disliked, so originally I wanted him to run more errands for me, let people know that he's my personal attendant, so they'd be nicer to him.
I didn't realize they were already nasty to that
point.
Not only did things get messed up, he got bullied too.
If you think about it from another angle, you'll find his moodiness understandable.
Feng Xin disagreed wholeheartedly.
Why is it your fault that he's moody? You're the crown prince, how did you end up owing anyone anything for promoting them? Your Highness, I really don't understand why you think so highly of him. Si Lian grinned.
Feng Xin, did you know, there are so many people in this world that are nothing but rocks in my eyes?
Feng Xin didn't understand. Si Lian walked with his hands behind his back. Rocks are everywhere, but precious jades are hard to come by.
When it comes to martial arts, I've only ever seen two people who could be called jades.
One is you. The other is him. He suddenly stopped in his step, turned his head around, his eyes shining brightly.
I truly think that Mu King is extremely gifted.
Such a precious jade, how can it be left to collect dust, and hide its beauty just because of background and temper? Si Lian looked determined. No. I think that's wrong.
You ask why I think so highly of him.
It's the same reason as why I think so highly of you. Ones that are destined to shine, I must let them shine. Besides, I don't believe that goodwill brings bad returns. Feng Xin stopped too. After listening to Si Lian's speech, he scratched his head.
As long as you know what you want.
How you do it is your business. Yeah. So, where did Mu King run off to? Si Lian said. Just then, another couple of young trainees approached him, a basket in their hands, playing around. When they saw Si Lian, they called out to him in unison, their voices happy. Your Highness.
Si Lian responded with a smile, too.
The trainees came up to them and thrusted the basket before the two, saying happily, will your Highness have some cherries? They've been washed in the springs already. Very clean, and very sweet. The basket was full of vivid little round red cherries, looking rather precious. Si Lian and Feng Xin
picked out a few to eat, and they were indeed juicy and sweet.
One of the young trainees asked, when we walked over we heard your Highness asking about Mu King. Were you looking for him?
I think we saw him when we passed through the cherry woods. Is that right?
Thanks for letting me know, Si Lian said. Thus, the two walked hastily towards the cherry woods. Atop Mount Taikang, other than the abundant wild maples, there were also many fruit trees, peaches, pears, oranges, and also cherries. The fruit trees were nourished by springs, bathed in the mountainous mist and sunny dews, bearing fruits filled with spiritual aura. Other than offering them as tribute to the palace, the rest were reserved for the disciples in
the pavilion, who could munch them after a hard day's work.
Outside the Royal Holy Pavilion, it would be
Hard to buy a single one even with 100 gold pieces.
The cherry trees stood row after row, and within the fresh new leaves hung beads and beads of red pearl like cherries, looking delightfully enticing. Si Lian and Feng Xin walked for a while looking for Mu King in the woods, but soon after, they heard quarreling voices coming from just ahead of where they were, and they unconsciously slowed to a stop. Next chapter.
Ch.62, Lost Red Pearl, Inadvertent Eyes Red with Desire 3. Ahead of them stood 4 or 5 white-robed trainees, each with a basket in hand, appearing to have come to pick fruits. However, they weren't encircling any fruit trees, but rather a person.
Even from afar, with their power of hearing, they could still clearly hear the particulars of the quarrel. One of the young men said, "No wonder there seemed to be less fruit in the woods lately."
So it was someone who's been squatting around stealing.
A soft voice replied, "The fruits grown on Mount Taikang can be picked by anyone who's a disciple at the pavilion, so how is it stealing? Besides, there's hundreds and thousands of fruit trees here. There's no way
there'd be less fruit by my power alone."
The voice belonged to Mu King, and from the sleeve corner that could be seen through from that crowd, it looked like he had already taken off the black ghost costume and changed back to the usual plain training outfit.
That trainee humphed. Of course, if it was only you picking for yourself, the fruit wouldn't be noticeably less. But you don't just pick for yourself, do you?
You sneak them down the mountain for other people. Exploiting the benefits, how shameless.
Si Lian understood the situation immediately.
The trainees who couldn't stand Mu King were picking on him again. Mu King came from a poor family. His mother, who lived at the foot of the mountain in the city, led a meager life.
In the past, she could only make some money from seamstressing here and there, but after
her eyes went bad, she could no longer do that work, and could only wait for Mu King to bring home the money he'd earned from running errands on the mountain. Sometimes he would pick up some fresh fruit from Mount Taikang to have her try, and it wasn't really anything major because there weren't any rules against it. Nonetheless, when spoken of out loud, it still sounded bad. To have it brought up like this was even more insulting and embarrassing. Mu King's voice was laced with ice. "Zhu Shisheng, we usually rarely talk, but you have picked on me again and again.
Yesterday, too, you wouldn't let me through to the Xixiang pavilion to pass on word."
"How have I offended you?" That young man named Zhu was indeed the trainee that guarded the door to the Xixiang pavilion, and when he heard the matter from the day before brought up, his anger flared. "You're the one who wasn't mindful enough to do your job and almost botched the event, so why are you blaming me? You should blame yourself for acting all secretive, making other people think you're up to no good. If you had just said outright what you were doing, nothing would have happened. Thanks to you, His Highness almost messed up, and I got yelled at by the Guoshi."
He threw the basket on the ground as he griped, gesturing for everyone to go into attack. Si Lian couldn't watch anymore and shouted, "Stop."
When the trainees heard his voice, they were all shocked, turning their heads and called, "Your Highness." Si Lian and Feng Xin approached, and by then, that Zhu Shisheng had already grabbed Mu King by the shoulder and had him pushed against the trunk of a tree. The brawl not yet started.
If they really did start, Even if it was 1 against 20, Mew King would have gained the upper hand. But, if he wanted to stay in
the royal holy pavilion, then he must never raise his fist. Si Lian smiled.
What's everyone doing?
That Zhu Shisheng was a decent, plain-looking young man, and had looked up to the crown prince. He froze hearing Si Lian's inquiry and hurriedly let go of Mew King. This we were. Si Lian continued to smile.
Although I don't know why everyone is quarreling, Mew King is my personal
attendant, so if he does anything it's generally under my command. I didn't realize there was some offense in having him pick some fruit for me.
The trainees all bowed.
No. So it was His Highness that asked him to come.
We misunderstood. On the side, Mew King leaned against a tree, and was first taken aback when he heard Si Lian say him
coming was under his command. He quickly righted his collar, lowered his head, and didn't speak. Cold sweat was rolling down the backs of those trainees as they profoundly apologized to Si Lian, then to Mew
King, and finally hurried away after picking up their baskets, escaping the cherry woods.
Si Lian saw the basket Mew King had brought on the ground, and bent down to pick it up and passed it to him.
Want some help?
Mew King didn't take the basket, but raised his head and watched Si Lian with an unreadable expression. For a moment before he spoke.
Your Highness.
What is it? Si Lian said. Why must you always show up at times like these? Si Lian.
Feng Xin, on the other hand, became upset.
What do you mean? Is it wrong to come and save you? Mew King gave him a look and took the basket. Feng Xin stiffened, and said, listen up. What happened before was my fault.
I didn't mean to accuse you.
And everything was only said offhandedly. There's no need for you to think deeply about anything.
Suspecting this or that. I don't care for anything other than His Highness, and I'm not interested in gossip.
That's all I have to say, so stop being so moody. PFFFT.
At first Si Lian thought his words were too aggressive, but towards the end, it was strangely
funny. Mew King glared at Feng Xin, and Si Lian waved his hand.
All right.
Everything Feng Xin said is true.
Let's just forget anything happened.
Nothing's happened.
A moment later, Mew King said begrudgingly, I'll look for that red coral pearl again later.
Maybe it was dropped on the street.
It wouldn't be good for Si Lian to look too much like he didn't care, so he replied, all right. Only if you have the time.
But if it was dropped on the streets, then it'll have gotten picked up by somebody by now. It seemed Mew King had nothing more to say, so he picked up the cherries that were dropped onto the
ground and put them back into his basket.
He didn't pick that many in the first place, and moved to leave the woods. Si Lian, however, saw many enticing fresh cherries, and casually picked a bunch and dropped
them into his basket.
Mew King was slightly taken aback. Si Lian said, next time you want to pick fruits for your mother, just say you're picking them under my command, and no one will say anything. The Guoshi told me to return to the palace for a few days, so I plan on leaving tomorrow. Why don't you make your visit down the mountain too?
Let's just head back for today.
It took a while, but at last Mew King said in a quiet voice, thank you, Your Highness. The next day, Si Lian descended the mountain with Feng Xin and Mew King in tow.
The moment they reached the foot of the mountain, Right outside the giant mountain gates, they saw a shining, golden carriage.
A young man dressed in a collared brocade, with whip in hand, was lying just in the front seat of the carriage, his legs crossed, looking lively and important. The second he saw Lian
exiting the gates, he leapt to his feet and ran towards him in a mad dash, shouting in obvious joy.
Cousin Crown Prince. Naturally, it was Qi Rong. And only he would have the free time to wait for Lian at the foot of Mount Taikang. He skipped over and cried, "My patience has finally paid off."
Lian grinned and ruffled his hair, laughing.
Did Qi Rong grow taller again? How did you know I was
returning to the palace today? Qi Rong giggled. I didn't.
I just waited, and knew you'd have to come out sooner or later.
I refuse to believe you wouldn't.
You're quite free, aren't you? Lian said helplessly. Are you studying properly?
What about sword
practice? If mother asks me to test your studies again, I won't help you.
Qi Rong blinked, his eyes shifty, and suddenly he jumped up and down.
Never mind all that. Look at my new carriage. Cousin Crown Prince, come and board it, ride my carriage back to the palace. He grabbed Lian's hand and pulled him to the carriage, but Lian only felt danger. You're driving.
Feng Xin and Mu King approached too.
Technically, servants must sit at the front, but Qi Rong's face dropped immediately, cracking the whip in his hand.
I asked Cousin Crown Prince to get on, but I didn't say you too.
Think I'd let lowlives touch my golden coach?
Get the hell outta here.
Lian quietly barked, Qi Rong. Feng Xin had met Qi Rong many times before, and already knew of his potty mouth, and his vulgar and condescending character, but Mu King had never entered the palace before, and so had naturally never gotten the chance to go near Prince Xiao Jing. Qi Rong was feeling extremely aggrieved, but seeing Lian about to walk away, he painfully and begrudgingly consented the two shitty lowlives to board his precious golden coach. However, they had only just entered the coach, and all three of them immediately regretted the decision. Qi Rong drove like a madman, the whip in his hand lashing non-stop, screaming who knows what, and the white horse neighed in shock, the wheels spinning frantically, thrashing down the streets, refusing to stop. No matter how much Lian screamed for him to. They almost crashed into a number of pedestrians and
stalls, and thank goodness for Feng Xin and Mu King who sat at the front and grabbed the reins to
sidetrack the horse, otherwise this berserk journey was going to cost at least 20 lives. When they finally reached the palace and the coach slowed down, Lian, Feng Xin, and Mu King all breathed a sigh of relief at the same time.
Lian wiped off his cold sweat, and the other two had been lashed by Qi
Rong's whip a number of times, their hands covered in welts. Yet Qi Rong rose to his feet, one leg
stepping on the white horses behind. He proclaimed proudly, "What do you think, Cousin Crown Prince?"
I drive pretty well, right?
Lian got off the carriage and replied, "I'm going to tell father and mother to confiscate your coach."
Qi Rong was shocked. What? Regarding Xianlei culture, 1. They loved gold, 2. They loved precious stones, 3. They loved beauties, 4. They loved music, and 5. They loved art. The palace of Xianlei was thus the most distinguished place where all that they loved coalesced. Traversing through the large courtyard, walking Down the crimson hallway, not everything was gilded or built of jade, as there were also masterpieces. Paintings hung all around, and soft music wafting in the air, creating the illusion of paradise. The palace was Si Lian's home, the place where he grew up. Feng Xin was chosen to be his personal guard at the age of 14, and had long gotten used to the sight. However, it was Mu King's first time seeing such a building, and he couldn't help but be awed.
Yet, the more awed he was, the more careful he
became, and the more he didn't dare to have others sense what he was feeling, didn't dare to take a wrong step. Si Lian went to meet with the queen straight away. The queen was resting at Qifeng Manor, leaning on a small tea table tasting new leaves.
She had long received the message that the crown prince had
returned, her eyes crescent-shaped in joy. She extended both arms before her son even walked near.
She said, finally willing to come home to see Mom.
Feng Xin and Mu King stood guard outside. Si Lian entered the chamber with Qi Rong in tow, and he reached out to hold his mother's hands when he approached. Didn't I just visit 2 months ago? The queen grumbled, what a heartless child. Even wrong,
For you to keep an old woman like me
company, but here you are, sounding all self-righteous when you haven't come home for 2 months.
Si Lian laughed.
And how is mother old?
You look no more than 10-something.
Like we're of the same
generation.
The queen was jubilant hearing those words of praise.
Even if she had a son as old as Si Lian, because of her status and wealth, she was very well maintained, and still looked the part of a noble beauty.
Still, the word that left her lips was light admonishment, flatterer. Si Lian glanced at the small tea table and there was a jaded cup, its contents emitting a strange fragrance.
He asked curiously, what's this?
And picked it up. But the queen warned, don't drink it. You can't drink that. For is the word for son or child, but when added to a name, it becomes an affectionate tag akin to meaning little or sonny.